Hello and welcome to Newsclick. Today we have with us Dr. Amit Sengupta of Jan Swasthya Abhyan. Amit, recently the Ranbaxy case has made the headlines. $500 million in settlement with the Federal Drug Authority and a huge campaign against the drug industry talking about substandard drugs, basically making out that drugs from India, particularly from the generic industry, is not safe. Is it a very large settlement? Is this something very unusual for drug companies? Of course, Ranbaxy cannot be defended for whatever the problems might be. But is it really something which is completely exceptional that this has happened? Or is it something which other drug companies have also faced? And this specific attack on the generic industry is only an excuse for the larger campaign against generics in the United States and elsewhere?
No, clearly there is a clear motivation behind the campaign. It's not an innocent campaign. And the target is the Indian generic industry, which by big pharma, the large pharmaceutical companies based in the US and Europe, see generic industry from India as a threat in their own markets. And if you really look at the kind of press that this story has been getting, it is clear that they are really trying to go after the Indian generic industry in order to demonize and delegitimize it. And for example, the Fortune blog, the long rambling story that Fortune carried, even the title, it's dirty medicine. So the image that they are trying to create is very clear. The dirty country producing dirty medicine in dirty facilities and warning US citizens against such medicines. Now, this contrasts actually. If you go to the US FDA site, you will see the US FDA has a question and answer page there where they talk about generic medicines, and what it says is that we test generic medicines regularly and they are not less safe than other medicines, similar medicines in the market. So, this is what the US FDA itself says. So, we have to put the whole story in a proper perspective. There have been several cases, some of them fairly recently, where drug companies have been slapped with felony charges. The largest payout actually is by Pfizer. This case was in 2009. And among other things, Pfizer was also charged of bribing doctors, bribing various officials in order to illegally sell medicines that they were not supposed to, $2.3 billion. Then Glaxo paid out, this was $3 billion, 6 times the Ranbaxy settlement.
$3 billion settlement.
It was a $3 billion. This was in 2012, and again on very similar charges of off-label use, of bribing doctors, of actually getting people to write in journals, planted stories in favor of their medicines, etc.
Also the quality of medicine.
The sort of parallel case that exists, quite recent, is again relates to Glaxo in 2010, when one of their plants was indicted for producing substandard medicines. In fact, the charges against the Glaxo plant were much more serious than against Ranbaxy's plants. It included, for example, charges that their bottling plant was so badly damaged or malfunctioning so badly that there was a possibility that it would mix 2 different kinds of medicines into the same package. So it was, and they were fined $750 million for that. If you go to the US FDA site, every month they send out warning notices to companies. So that's how the US FDA works. Now, if you come back to the present case involving Ranbaxy, now it is true that Ranbaxy lied. Ranbaxy lied to the regulators. It gave them false information, but there is no evidence, and the US FDA again has said this, that we have no reports of patients actually being harmed because they have taken medicines manufactured by Ranbaxy. So, what actually Ranbaxy was finally indicted for is in providing wrong documentation, in lying in the kind of documentation that they were putting together, and in not adhering to some of the US FDA norms that you require to adhere to. Now,
the two issues here. One is getting permission to sell drugs in the United States and therefore satisfying regulatory requirements. So, one set of issues really pertain to that, how they obtain these clearances, and so that was what was called as trying to game the system. The second is the quality of medicine, and that is a separate issue of how it is being manufactured, what are called good manufacturing practices, or how they were observed or not. Regarding the first, there seems to be a fair amount of evidence that Ranbaxy was indeed trying to game the system. Would you agree with that?
Yes, of course. You see, Ranbaxy, especially in the case of the drug Lipitor, which is an anti-cholesterol drug. What Ranbaxy was trying to do was get a first mover advantage. In the US, after a patent expires, if you are the first generic to get the requisite regulatory clearance, then you have a 6-month exclusive marketing right kind of a situation where you are the only generic who is allowed to market. So, that is what Ranbaxy was really aiming for, and in probably typical style in which much of Indian business is done, they tried to cut corners, produced documentation which was obviously figments that they created. Now, coming back to the quality, again the issue is that there have been various other independent agencies which have vouched for the fact that Ranbaxy's quality is not different from the quality of other drugs that are made by other companies, including the WHO, which has sent out a kind of a advisory on this, because Ranbaxy is among one of the Indian companies that produces a number of drugs in the WHO's pre-qualification program. The South African regulatory agency recently has said the same thing. Now, this is important because the way WHO uses the pre-qualification program is it's collaborative. WHO does not have its own mechanism. So, it has drug regulatory agencies from different countries going to other countries to look at their facilities. So, the South African regulatory agency actually had inspected Ranbaxy's facilities. And it is based on that they are saying that we did not find any problem in the manufacturing facilities in Ranbaxy. So, that is something that is public knowledge. So, it is clearly not that, for example, the story in Fortune or the other media stories that have come up, it is not that people do not know about this. This Dinesh Thakur, who was the mole whistleblower in the company. Now, he has written this very long and rambling story, and in one place he talks about how his son's ear infection did not clear with the Ranbaxy medicine, and it cleared immediately when he switched over to a Glaxo medicine. Now, apart from everything else, I mean, this is very poor evidence. And someone who is in any way remotely connected to the sciences should not be making such a claim. But apart from that, I mean, it is the same Glaxo who 2 years back has been indicted for more serious charges, and he does not think about it. So, it is obviously a motivated campaign that is now being mounted by, and it is obviously being somehow supported by big pharma, by the northern governments in some ways, and it's problematic for the Indian generic industry to get out of this.
But let's also look at the other side of it. Ranbaxy was started by Mohan Singh? By Mohan Singh, and who really built a very good Indian generic company. It's also true that after Bhai Mohan Singh has left the helm of the company, if you will, his son, who started reneging from India's
Parminder Singh,
who later
passed
headed
away
recently.
Recently,
Parminder Singh, and then his son, who was after that, who was heading it. They would have also, is it true that they were trying to make money in a hurry, and therefore did they initially deviated from what Bhai Mohan Singh's principle was, which was to really build a case for a strong Indian generic industry and not align it with the multinationals. And under Parminder Singh, Ranbaxy really broke ranks with the Indian generic industry, aligned with the multinationals, saying that becoming a supplier of generics to multinationals is preferable than fighting for, protection of the Indian patent regime that existed. As you are aware of this part of it, do you think it's also trying to make money in a hurry, and therefore also what leads to the current Ranbaxy scenario?
I mean, at the end of the day, all companies, and especially drug companies, because they have a particularly gory history, would cut corners if they are allowed to, right? And unfortunately, and this is true, unfortunately in India, they work in a situation, in a system where regulation is weak. We have the laws in place. It's not, the issue is not that we don't have the laws in place, but the CDSCO, the regulatory agency in India, is understaffed. It's got very few resources, and there are, of course, allegations of corruption. Many of them, or some of them, have been substantiated in the past. So this is not to, I mean, all that we have been talking about earlier is not to say that our regulatory environment is what we need it to be. But the two situations we are talking about are different. This was about Ranbaxy trying to sell in the US market, and what they actually called adulterated in the US market. The definition of adulteration in the US is very different for regulatory purposes. It means that if they have a doubt that the manufacturing process is flawed, even if there is insufficient documentation, they will call the drug adulterated.
So it's not a quality test of the drug as much as whether the proper documentation exists for the
exactly.
process.
So as I was saying earlier, so there is no evidence of the quality being not being up to standard, but it is the particular language that they use when manufacturing practices are not found. So the issue is not of adulteration, but the fact remains that today most big companies in India, Indian as well as multinational, get a bulk of their drugs manufactured in the small scale sector.
What is called loan licensing?
Loan licensing and by various other. And a very large portion of the active ingredient is today being imported. 50% of that is coming from China. Nobody has seen those facilities or actually goes and sees those facilities. So today it's the whole regulatory environment is in a big mess, and it's true not just in India. The API, the active ingredient centers are few all over the world, and every drug company today buys drugs from some of these from Chinese and some of the other hubs. So there is a case for much more stringent regulatory functions being adhered to by the CDSCO, which means much larger investment. But the point is, this cuts across all companies.
It's not restricted to generics alone.
It's not as if Ranbaxy's drugs are bad or Cipla's drugs are bad, but Pfizer's drugs are better. If you really look at the Indian market, most of the drugs actually come from the same source. So it's really about the regulatory agency being able to assure patients, which unfortunately today they are not able to do completely, that the drugs in the market are of standard and safe. But that's not really related to the Ranbaxy case in the US market, because they have a different system of regulating, they have different rules by which they regulate.
Amit, we also look upon this as the opportunity, if you will, that after Novartis, the pharmaceutical industry sort of striking back, because Novartis case, when the patent case was lost in India, is obviously a big blow to the pharmaceutical industry worldwide, because it's gone across the globe that this can be done, and as of date nobody has yet gone to the WTO dispute settlement saying that India's patent law is actually discriminatory and it's not TRIPS compliant. So given the threat of the patent system being weakened, if you will, by the TRIPS flexibilities which Indian case has shown, do you think this is a way of setting if you will, the balance right by using this to actually strike at the generic industry worldwide, and also introducing the fear that this kind of industry, if it comes in, then you are at risk.
Oh yes, I mean, they have obviously gleefully lapped up this story, isn't it? And there's a orchestrated campaign that's been going around now. But at the end of the day, again, finally, Ranbaxy lied. So, unfortunately, what Ranbaxy did is washing up on the entire generic industry in India. And a lot of people, because these are technical details which are very difficult to understand unless you actually go through it. So, a lot of people, including people in India, are buying this story. You have a PIL now in the Supreme Court saying that Ranbaxy's medicine should be banned. You have some big hospitals in Bombay now saying that they have stopped buying medicines from
Apollo
Ranbaxy.
yesterday. Have issued
Yeah,
this.
so these are knee-jerk reactions, but it also shows the power of the campaign that is now taking place. That even in India, it's not, we're not talking about the US. Even in India, people are taking this so seriously and trying to take various actions on this.
So, a self goal, if you will, after the Novartis case by the Indian generic industry, which today, of course, is not Indian at all. It's actually owned by the Japanese.
Yeah, no, that's really the real irony of this story. That Ranbaxy is actually a Japanese company owned by Daiichi, and in fact, as we were talking about earlier, Ranbaxy had taken a different route much earlier. By the 1990s, they had started aligning with Big Pharma. They tied up with Eli Lilly at one point. They had, for a brief while, some arrangement with Glaxo, and now, of course, Daiichi has taken over majority share. It's unfortunate that Ranbaxy is being seen as the typical Indian company, which it is not. But it is also true that given the fact that the Indian market the domestic market is not growing, and that is because we invest so little in the public health system, and there is a limit to which people can pay from their pockets, right? So, but the domestic industry, its manufacturing capacity has grown enormously. So now if you look at the big companies, and it's not just Ranbaxy, if you look at the top 10 companies in India, the generic Indian companies, 70% of their production is actually been exported. Now that's apart from this present controversy, it has a bearing on the trajectory of all these companies, not just Ranbaxy, others are going to follow suit as well, because if they are going to compete and look at the export market, and largely this is the US market and the European market, that's the two together is almost 2/3 or more, 70% of the global market. If that's the market that they are eyeing for, then it has repercussions regarding how much they will be bothered about the domestic market, one, and second, that they will build linkages with Big Pharma to survive, and that's what they are doing. The Ranbaxy actually showed the way, but we do know that many other companies, big Indian companies, are tying up with Big Pharma through various licensing agreements, etc. So that's a bigger issue that has implications for the survival of the Indian generic industry, as we have known earlier, which is a self-reliant industry which has some nationalistic goals, etc. All that is actually starting to disappear now, and the lines are starting to blur between what is Big Pharma and what is Indian generic industry.
So increasingly it is becoming an inter-Big Pharma fight rather than Indian drug industry versus the global.
Yes, I mean, I wouldn't say entirely, but yeah, there are elements of that that you see now happening. I mean, so finally it's a fight between Daiichi and the American big Pfizer and others, isn't it?
But in the larger battle of generics versus branded patented medicine and trying to keep the patented medicines brand value up, this certainly is going to harm.
Yeah, of course, the bottom line of the story is Indian generics are bad. That's what the story in Fortune said. Dirty medicine. So that's the bottom line of the story. That's what they want to hit at finally.
So as you said earlier, at the end of it, what will stick is Ranbaxy line, and that's not good for the Indian generic industry or the generic industry in general. Thank you very much. We'll follow further developments on the pharmaceutical industry and the health issues in the country with Dr. Sengupta and others. Thank you very much for coming, Amit.